And as I was going through my divorce, I found that the lack of responsiveness and the time that would go on between the time I had a question and the time that I was getting a response was sometimes so long from my attorney. And I also realized that a lot of issues could be resolved if people were responding, if attorneys were responding. It's a common problem, frankly, in matrimonial because, it's a very stressful time for people. And it's so stressful because they're dealing with their finances and their children. And what could be more stressful than those two topics? So anyway, I decided at that point I was going to go get my law degree and that I wanted to become a matrimonial attorney. And I will say that my passion is really empowering people financially, particularly women financially, because I see so many women who come into my office who don't have a grasp of their financial situation. They may not know what their expenses are or what the assets are, or just about anything, frankly, to do with their finances.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about navigating the financial issues of a divorce. I'm delighted to welcome Lisa Zeiderman. Lisa is an award-winning matrimonial and family law attorney, managing partner of Miller Zeiderman LLP, certified financial divorce analyst, certified financial litigator, and regular contributing author to several magazines, including Psychology Today, Financial Advisor Magazine, New York Law Journal, and the Forbes Business Council. You can reach Lisa at her website, lisazeiderman.com, and I'll include that link in the show notes. Welcome, Lisa. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Linda. I'm really excited to have this discussion with you today.
I really appreciate it. And part of what I'm trying to do with this podcast is to help people be happy and help people to be able to overcome the challenges that life throws at them. And there's one challenge that affects many people, and that is the topic of divorce. And it's a situation where it affects every part of us. It affects us mentally and emotionally and socially and financially. So I really appreciate you being here today to be able to help give us some guidelines so that we can protect ourselves and also so that we can be okay as we try to navigate our current situation. Is there anything about your story that you want to share to help us to know you a little bit better and why you do what you do?
Sure. So I actually was in the fashion business when I first started out after high school and had my own showroom on 7th Avenue, and then actually went through my divorce. And as I was going through my divorce, I found that the lack of responsiveness and the time that would go on between the time I had a question and the time that I was getting a response was sometimes so long from my attorney. And I also realized that a lot of issues could be resolved if people were responding, if attorneys were responding. It's a common problem, frankly, in matrimonial because, it's a very stressful time for people. And it's so stressful because they're dealing with their finances and their children. And what could be more stressful than those two topics, not in that particular order. So anyway, I decided at that point I was going to go get my bachelor's degree and my law degree, and that I wanted to become a matrimonial attorney. So that's really my story in a nutshell. And I will say that just in terms of my background, one of the things that my passion is really empowering people financially, particularly women financially, because I see so many women who come into my office who don't have a grasp of their financial situation. They may not know what their expenses are or what the assets are or what the liabilities are or just about anything, frankly, to do with their finances. And so I'm also, on the board and in fact, the board chair of an organization called Savvy Ladies, which helps women for financial empowerment. It's got a helpline where people can call in and be paired one-on-one with financial professionals free of charge. So I do that. I also help, I'm on a board for Family Legal Care, which helps pro se litigants advocate for themselves. So I'm very involved in the community as well.
Wow. And would you mind sharing that contact information?
So it's Savvy, SAVVY, ladies, it's one word, .org.
Ladies as in
Yes, LADIES, savvyladies.org. And there's a place where they would be able to go and, get free help. They literally are paired one-on-one with a financial advisor. They can there's an app that actually NASDAQ created for us where they'll be able to write their question, and then there'll be a financial advisor who will contact them, and they are able to do this all free of charge.
That's
It's a great
fantastic.
resource.
That sounds amazing. So kind of like a chat where you put in your question and somebody will come back to you or get back to you when they can, or
Yeah, it's actually better than a chat. You're going to get a live person. They're going to do a Zoom or a phone call or something with you. It's not just a chat. It's actually a
really?
live person. Yeah, we have over 300 volunteers who are financial advisors across the country. And when they see the question, they'll pull it off the app, and they will then contact the person. They'll set up a meeting. It's usually like an hour consultation, and they will answer their financial, questions about the issue.
Gosh, how rare is it to get an actual person?
Yeah,
That's awesome. Thank
yeah,
you. Thank you for being a part of that. Oh my gosh. And all those wonderful volunteers who have the skills to be able to reach it and they're willing to share their time.
yeah.
I am so impressed with you already, where you dealt with a challenging situation and you can immediately see where some of the problems are. It's like, I don't really feel heard. People aren't responding to me. And if someone could respond, it would not only help my situation, but it would help calm my feelings of anxiety. And so you recognize that that was a problem. And not only would it be a problem for you, but it's going to be a problem for everyone else going through the same thing. And so you took tremendous effort to make sure that you could pay it forward in helping other people. I really appreciate that because you saw a need and you jumped in to fill it. So I hope that it's a win-win situation, and I'm sure it is, where as you're able to give to others, it also rewards you, which it should.
Of course.
So, gosh, so many things to talk about. Oh my gosh, money, kids, like you said, there's nothing that's dear, I mean, to our hearts that matters, that gives us anxiety. I just read one of your articles in Psychology Today about a current trend of weaponizing incompetence. Is it okay if we talk about that a little bit? Because,
Sure.
it happens and it's pretty darn frustrating.
It is definitely frustrating. What did you like about the article, Linda? What parts of it caught your eye?
Oh, excellent question. Okay, so let's talk about quickly and explain for maybe people who haven't read the article or don't know what that's talking about, what that incompetence is. And you mentioned it's often used in terms of those two things that matter most to us, our finances and our children. So we can either, when it comes to finances, I can, kind of act stupid. I can withhold some information that if the courts knew and if my significant other or former significant other knew about the money that I was receiving, then they would have legal claim to it. So I'm going to pretend that I don't have anything and I don't know. So it's kind of that deception that way. And then another form is in terms of our children, where someone maybe who isn't really interested in a parental role kind of claims incompetence, like, well, I don't know how to, comb my daughter's hair, and I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to do that, so you take care of it. So that they kind of absolve themselves from responsibility. And then when I read the article, it's like problem, 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 problem. Solution was like one sentence long. But it basically the solution was it talked about, okay, first, please put your children first. When you are one of the, I mean, obviously you're one of the people involved, but it can happen from either side. Don't use this as a weapon if it's going to hurt your children, because it is going to hurt your children. And then the other things were, if it's going on, basically your recourse is let your lawyer know and let them kind of handle it. And then if you need therapy or your children need therapy, let's get the help that you need. So it was good to bring it up. And yet the solution is like, there really isn't a solution. It's okay, here we go. Become aware of what the problem is so that you can handle it. But there's no easy answer.
Here's the thing I'm going to say. I think that generally there's no easy answer to a lot of gamesmanship that people engage in during divorce. And so what you as someone going through divorce who's experiencing your spouse or your partner or parent of your child, the other parent, is engaging in, when they're engaging in gamesmanship, obviously you need to recognize it, but then you need to communicate. And I will tell you, one of the issues that, sometimes we encounter is that people don't communicate, right? Or they communicate when it's too late or it's over. And I always say to clients, you really need to communicate. We're not proactively reaching out to you unless we need documents or answers, or we're scheduling depositions, or we're engaging in discovery. But on an everyday basis, we're not going to call you up and say, "Hey, how's it going?" Because that is something you don't want us to do. We're billing when we speak to you, and that's just a reality of our relationship. So it is up to the client to say, this is going on, to email us, to text us, to call us, and say, we have somebody who's asking for custody here, but they're just not rising to the occasion of doing the things that need to be done, and they are claiming incompetence when they are very well able to do this, because they would rather shift the burden to the other person. Or we certainly can see when the discovery is not produced, when the documents are not forthcoming. So that is a place that we know we have to do something, but we're not in the homes where all of this is going on, right? So if there are things going on with your children that are not right, you need to communicate that to your attorney. You need to send an email, or you need to say, this is going on. Is this okay? So that when we arrive, either in a meeting or at the courthouse, we're not hearing it for the first time and trying to scramble to figure it all out, because by that time it's happened and it's a little late for us to be catching up on all of these things.
Wow. Okay. You brought up some very important things, and now my mind is racing and following different rabbit holes. You started with the necessity of communication, of good communication. And then you talked about a concern that is very real. We talked about some of our main concerns are our finances and our kids. And when we have to hire a lawyer, every time we have a connection, it's going to cost money. And so that can be a deterrent to just say, you know what, you guys just figure things out. We've had to hire an attorney a couple of times throughout my life for some different circumstances. And, the only thing that I really had understood prior to that in a court situation was, watching movies and TV. And it just seemed like, I don't know, the actual people involved were not that important. It was like the lawyer's game. And so when we started, it was kind of like we expected not, I mean, if you say it out loud, it sounds stupid, but we expected the lawyers to be able to read our minds, and that they automatically understood with perfect clarity both sides of the situation, and could obviously see that I was right, because, that's important. But we learned from experience that that's not the case. And I know that sounds silly when you say it out loud, but when you're in the experience, it just seems logical. And so if we want a positive outcome and to make this investment that with our lawyer to be more cost effective, it would be very helpful if they were empowered with all of the necessary information. As the person involved, it is our responsibility to get the information to the lawyer so that they can know what can be done with it. We cannot expect the lawyer to just read our mind or to know all of the details, because like you said, you're not in my home. You don't know. So when we're talking about cost effectiveness, if we give them the best information, then that means that they don't need to spend as much time, they mean the lawyer, to be able to come up with tactics that are going to be beneficial for me. So it actually gives us a better return on investment if we have good communication with our representative here, our lawyer. So with that in mind, it kind of changes the next time that we had a court thing. It was like I had all the information, handed it over, and they're like, whoa, this is awesome. And it went like that. Everything was taken care of. And it was just as positive as that horrible experience could possibly have been.
Exactly.
So thank you for bringing that up. That's, if anyone's going to come up with a key takeaway, I think that's a big one.
No, that it's incredibly important. And you're right. Your attorney is only as good as the information that you give to your attorney. I will say also, you need to be honest with your attorney, because you do not want your attorney blindsided in the courtroom making an argument about something and then finding out, well, okay, but this happened and that happened, and that's the reason that we're in this situation now. So, be honest with your attorney. Your attorney is there to protect you, but they can only do so much if you're not being forthcoming about the situations.
Excellent point. Thank you for that clarification, because you do need the whole story. Because if you have this fabulous argument ready to go and then you're blindsided by this information that you didn't know, it's like, well, everything that I had prepared is now gone. Whereas perhaps if I knew about that, then I would be able to respond. So very well done. Okay, guys, lawyers are humans, just FYI. Okay, so let's talk about protecting our finances, since that's kind of the topic we're going on. So kind of, what do we do before we get married? Maybe while we're married? And if it doesn't work out, what do I do afterwards?
Okay, so before you get married, the thing that is most important is to enter into a prenup. If you really want to protect your finances, if you want to have a roadmap as to how your finances are going to be treated both during and in the event that there is a divorce after the marriage, then a prenup is the solution. And I am doing more and more prenups. I think we do, we do so many prenups each week now. I think it's becoming a major trend out there that people are entering into prenuptial agreements. I also think that it's great to have that conversation early on. I'm not telling you to have it the first date, but you need to have that conversation as you're getting serious with somebody, so that you're not springing this idea on to somebody right before the wedding. In New York, we don't have a waiting period. So in other words, you can sign the prenup the day before, but it's great to be having these conversations and to be transparent about your finances. So, hey, I know I'm going to be coming into a large inheritance in my life. I don't know how much that inheritance is going to be or what assets I'm inheriting, but I do know that I want to keep that separate and apart. Hey, I just went through a first marriage or a second marriage, and I really don't want to be in a situation again where I am paying alimony or spousal support or dividing up my assets. I want to know that, my assets are my assets. My income is my income. Your income is your income. Neither one of us is going to be looking for alimony. Or, hey, I was in a marriage that was so controlling. I want everything to be super transparent and I want it all in joint accounts. And I don't want to go through a situation where things are in one person's name or another person's name. All great conversations to have. So, one of the things that I always ask people when they call me for a prenup is, well, have you discussed the terms of the prenuptial agreement with your fiancé? And when it's a yes, the prenup so often moves along quickly and without much fanfare or negotiation. And we draft a prenup and it's well received, usually on the other side. Sure, there might be some negotiation, but it's generally well received. What's not well received is a prenuptial agreement that is a complete surprise. That is not well received. So, or the terms are just such a surprise. You didn't talk about it. There was no conversation. And now you've got a prenup that says exactly the opposite what you had in mind as to a marriage. So that's what you could do before a marriage. During the marriage, you would follow your prenuptial agreement carefully. You would, if you haven't actually drafted a prenuptial agreement or signed one, you might actually decide that you want to enter into a postnuptial agreement. Not all states find postnuptial agreements valid. They are valid in New York. So you have to check your state law concerning postnuptial agreements. And of course, it's really important, and I stress this because so many people are so surprised by this, during the marriage to make sure that any inheritances, any premarital property that you came into the marriage with, that you keep that separate and apart if you are in a state that recognizes separate property. And when I say separate and apart from your income that you are actually earning during the marriage. So in New York, for example, and it's the only example I can give because I'm a New York attorney, right? But in New York, we definitely give credit for separate property. So if you come into the marriage with, an accounts, brokerage accounts, retirement accounts, businesses, you will get credit for those assets as long as you kept them separate and apart and didn't commingle them. Now, there are some exceptions if you do commingle them with marital earnings, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Because it's very complex. But essentially, you want to make sure that it's kept separate from all of your income, because your income is usually considered marital income unless you entered into a prenuptial agreement. And so you do not want to essentially mix the premarital property and the income that you're earning during the marriage. You want to keep those separate and apart. So that is one way for sure to protect your assets, and separate property and et cetera. It's good to save the statements. It's good to save the statements, and I know that is a tremendous burden, but scan them into a folder that you know is going to be safe. Put these statements into a safe place where you know where you can get them. That might be, by the way, your parents' home or someone else, a friend's home, so that you know that they are available to you if you need them to trace your separate property. And then after the marriage, if there is an after, because you've gotten divorced, in terms of making sure that you conduct to protect your assets, you want to make sure that you have captured all of the marital assets, that you've gotten credit for the separate property, and that you have identified each and every asset that exists so that you can divide it either equitably or, if it's a community property estate, in the way that community property estate deals with it.
Wow, I appreciate that. As you walk through each step, there is something that we can do, and that matters. When we talk about prenuptial agreements, it almost makes me sad that we have to prepare for a marriage to fail. And yet, as we prepare, we can do it in a way that helps us to be able to succeed. And one of the things that you mentioned is what works and everything goes smoothly is when we have good communication. And quite frankly, if you have good communication that's honest and open before, you have a much better chance of your marriage being able to survive. If you are in a situation where you throw someone a prenup that has all these crazy, circumstances, and you throw it at them at the end with no warning, that it's almost like you don't trust the other person to talk to him, and you want to bring in an authority figure of a lawyer to force the person to do what you want them to do. And it doesn't bode well. I mean, even as you're talking about it, you can almost feel like, wow, coming in, I don't think this one's going to last very long, which is sad. So, and I love that you mentioned that there's different ways to do it, where even in the prenup, it could be because of my, burned once and shy twice, or however that works. I want things to be separate. I need things to be this. Or I want it to be together, but I want it to be transparent. And that's a way that doesn't feel like, okay, I'm planning to separate. What it means is, can we be on the same page throughout this whole thing? And if we are, then things are going to go well. And if, unfortunately, things do fall apart, it's open and you know it's there so that you can work your way through it. So I loved the logic as you're explaining this. Now, once we're in the idea of getting an inheritance or getting something and keeping it separate and apart, I do have a clarification question. Does that mean like putting it in a separate account, or is keeping the statements sufficient? I mean, does it need to be?
No.
Okay.
It must be in a separate account. And that's what I think where people really unfortunately lose their inheritance and it becomes marital, is where they actually thought that if they kept the statements or if they put it in the same account as their income was. That's usually the fallacy, by the way. I have so many people who come to me and say, don't worry, I kept it separate. And I say, really? So nothing else went into the account when you got the inheritance? Well, no, I've been putting my income into that account. Well, that's the problem. Right? Because usually when you're putting your income in, you're also taking income out. You might be writing checks, you might be paying bills, you may be paying off, your credit cards, whatever, you're spending it down. And so bottom line is that you can't identify anymore in that glass of water. Okay. And when I say that glass of water, if you look at a glass of water, it's all clear. right? So the separate property goes in, you pour that separate property in, you then pour in your income. It all looks like water. And now you poured some out or you didn't. But either way, you cannot identify which drops of the water are your separate property inheritance and which drops of water are your income. And you have just done what is so important not to do, which is to commingle the property. Now, once in a while, somebody puts monies into an account and then they move them out very quickly because they realize that they needed that account maybe to make the transfer, but it was for what we call convenience purposes only. Maybe there wasn't another account to move it into at the time. You just got this inheritance and you put it in and then you move it out within weeks or, a month or two. Okay, usually you will get credit for that, but you need to keep your statements and you need to identify why you did it. And there are reasonable approaches to something like that. But if you are going to leave it in a joint account, leave it in your account where you've been putting your earnings, likely it's going to be lost forever. And so it's really important to make sure that you keep it, identify it, and keep it separate from the monies that you're earning during the marriage.
Okay. I'm glad that I asked that because that matters. I can see how someone could think they had kept it separate apart, but in reality, they were adding it to that glass of water. That was a really good analogy. So what I need is a separate cup. I need a separate glass and pour it in that glass. And now I
Yes.
know what was in there. And it's not that hard to open another account. So we can do this.
Sure. And it really isn't that hard. And then, of course, make sure you keep your statements. If there's a will, you should have kept your will, the will that, identified the inheritance, any documentation. Perhaps you received a house as an inheritance. And you're selling the house and keeping the proceeds. Make sure you identify all the steps, because somebody is going to make claim to that separate property likely later.
Okay. Wow. All right. Well, lots of things to think about. But when it comes down to it, none of those things that you mentioned were hard. They just need to be done. Let's just take the steps, put it in a separate glass. Let's just make sure we know. And in a divorce situation, then we have that glass of water, so to speak, that's fair to share. We're going to share this because it's right. And then this separate cup over here, we don't need to share that. So, and then we need to make sure that we're open and aware of what goes into that shared glass so that our partner does not say, well, actually all of this is mine and you get to share this little thimbleful. So, so each step. Okay. So if we do the right steps all along, it's going to protect us and then we'll be okay. So, let's say maybe I didn't do the steps. I'm not okay. And here we are. Do you kind of have any bounce back tips? I mean, what can I do?
So in New York, we talk about what's called equitable distribution, and that involves what contribution did you make to the accruing of each asset. Now, there is something you can say, certainly. You didn't keep it separate. But let's just say you put in a large amount of separate property into a home, or you put in a large amount of separate property into an account, a brokerage account. And now and for whatever reason, somehow it all got commingled. So the house, when you take your separate property and you put it into a house and you were able to show that, you get that. But sometimes what you've done is you've taken your separate property, put it into a joint account, then purchased the house. Maybe now it's not so easy to show that it's separate property. Your argument is going to be, my contribution is so much greater because of my inheritance. I had this large inheritance that came in, and it would be inequitable, unfair, okay, for this to be a 50-50 split, because if not for my inheritance, we couldn't have purchased the home, we wouldn't have had the down payment, etc. And so I should get a larger share of that property. It's an argument to make. I'm not telling you it will win every time, but it is definitely an argument to make, and you may get a larger percentage. It may not be dollar for dollar of what you put in from your inheritance or your separate property, but you may get a larger percentage of that particular asset. So that would be your bounce back, as you say, is arguing that. Again, you're going to need statements, you're going to need documentation, you're going to need to be very clear about it, because it is your burden to have that conversation and to be able to prove it. But there is something to be said for a equitable distribution being unequal. So equitable distribution in New York, and I think a lot of states, does not necessarily mean equal distribution. Everything is not equal all the time. Sometimes somebody might get 40% or 30% or 20% or 60% or 70%. So it's important to note that you need to talk about your contributions to each asset.
That's important to know. And as you're discussing this, and we're talking specifically about money, what if we're in a situation where one person has been the breadwinner and the other person has been home taking care of children? And so from the person who has been earning the money, they might think, well, all the money is mine because I made all of the money. And they don't feel like it's equal. What would be fair in a situation like that?
So, each state is going to be different. And frankly, each area in New York sometimes is different. And it depends on so many factors. So, for example, the length of the marriage, the age of the parties, how many children did you have, if any? What were the circumstances under which you, decided that one of you was going to be staying home and one of you was going to be going out to work? How did that help contribute to the family assets? The fact that you were, perhaps the stay-at-home parent, and the other person was able to go to work every day, travel every day, not have to worry about going to the doctor's appointments or the school conferences or getting the child to soccer or lacrosse or dance or any of those types of activities, that they could have a clear head and go to work, that you were running the household, making sure that there was food on the table at night for everyone, getting the meals cooked, if hiring the nanny, perhaps. Okay. Everything didn't need to be done by you per se, but you were the person who was instrumental and who created the family portion. In other words, the family dynamic where life was easier for the working spouse. And believe me, that's not an easy thing to do on a day-to-day basis. And also, it's not easy for somebody to go to work and have all those other responsibilities, right? Of doing all the things I just listed. It's going to have to pull at your career. And so if you could go in and be clear-headed because you had a spouse who was taking care of that, in our jurisdiction, many times it's going to be a 50-50 split of the assets. What it may not be a 50-50 split of is the business assets. So I want to be clear about that. It may be 50-50 split of the bank accounts, the brokerage accounts, the retirement accounts, but it may not be a 50-50 split if somebody started and created a business during the marriage.
Okay. So we're going back to kind of that idea of the glasses of water. So if we have a family glass, the contributions that a parent makes who's staying home with their children matters. Not the only thing in life that matters is money. However, we do require it to survive. So I appreciate, as you're giving that example, that the majority would be a 50-50 split of that glass of water that counts as family. But it is also fair for a person who is working on a business to be able to keep that cup separate so that they can continue to earn a living. Okay, I appreciate that.
So I want to just clarify, it's not that they're keeping it separate. It's that in New York, it's rarely, so in New York, if you have a business, what we would do is we would value the business during the divorce action. So we would have, an accounting firm, a forensic accounting firm, they would do a valuation of the business. They would look at all the documents, all the books and the records, the general ledgers, all of that. They would come to a value of the business. They would normalize some personal expenses that you might run through the business, et cetera, right? And then they would come to a value. And let's just say that value is, I don't know, $5 million. Okay, I'll just put a number on it. Okay. And now the question is, what percentage is the other spouse, the spouse who is not working in the business on a day-to-day basis. What percentage of that value is that spouse getting? Are they getting 20%, 30%, 40%? Did they work in the business perhaps? Okay. Maybe they did. Maybe they did all the bookkeeping or the office management or something where they were not only taking care of the family, but they were also working on a day-to-day basis in the business. Then they may be eligible for a 50% split. It's rare though in New York for a 50% split, in other words, a buyout of 50%. It's more likely that it's going to be anywhere from 25 to 35 to maybe 40%. So, and again, it's going to depend upon the facts of each situation.
And that does matter. You can't give a blanket advice because it's very individual depending on the circumstances. Lisa, I appreciate everything that you've shared today. Is there anything else you want to make sure that we cover before we close today?
No, I think the most important thing is to, as you go through your marriage, is to actually pay attention to your finances. You pay attention to so many things during life, right? But pay attention to your finances. If you don't understand something, ask. If you need to get a financial advisor, make sure that you not only get the financial advisor, but that you attend the meetings. Don't let somebody control or be in charge of the finances. You want to be an active participant. Maybe somebody's going to write the checks or somebody's going to review the bills, but you should be an active participant. It's your money too.
Excellent advice. Lisa, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Maya Angelou. She said, "You might not be able to control all the events that happen to you, but you can choose to not be reduced by them." Today, I invite our listeners to become empowered to thrive financially, mentally, and emotionally, despite a divorce or other unpleasant circumstances. See you next time on Linda's Corner. Thanks for listening. Please share and subscribe to help us reach new listeners. And if you'd like to heal your life from the inside out, there is a free video series at hopeforhealingfoundation.org. Just click on the Free Stuff tab. I also invite you to grab a copy of one of my books, like Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. See you next time on Linda's Corner.